You ever have one of those moments where everything feels completely normal until it doesn't? Like, you're just going through the motions, same routine, same faces, same stale cup of campus coffee, and then something shifts, and suddenly you're in a moment you know you're going to remember for a long time? That was Evan for me. It started like any other Monday. I was running late for my shift at the campus bookstore, juggling a half-full coffee cup in my overstuffed backpack while trying not to trip over my own feet. It had rained that morning, so everything smelled like wet pavement and bad decisions. Evan was already behind the register when I got there. He didn't look up when I punched in, just kept typing something into the system like he was solving a math problem that personally offended him. "You're late," he said flatly, not turning his head. "Yeah, good morning to you too," I muttered, dropping my bag behind the counter. Evan was always like that, blunt, quiet, a little broody. He had that kind of tired look like he stayed up too late, thinking too hard about things that didn't matter. Tall, dark-haired sleeves always rolled to his elbows like he was about to do something important. He wasn't loud, but he had presence. The kind that made you notice him even if you didn't want to. We weren't really friends. Not yet, anyway. Just coworkers with overlapping shifts and the occasional joke tossed across the break room. But that day, something felt different. The day was slow. A couple customers wandered in looking for used textbooks. Some girl flirted with Evan while I shelved philosophy paperbacks and pretended not to listen. He gave her a polite smile, said he wasn't into dating right now. I caught that part. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. We were closing up, me sweeping near the back while Evan finished the deposit. The lights were half off, the store humming with that weird, cozy quiet that only exists in empty spaces at night. That's when he said it. "You ever get tired of pretending?" I looked up, mid-sweep. "Pretending what?" He was leaning against one of the shelves now, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't meet my eyes. Like, pretending everything's fine. Pretending we're cool, we're happy, we're chill, all the time. I blinked. "Damn, that's a lot for a Monday night." He gave the smallest shrug. "Guess I'm just tired." Something about his voice made me stop what I was doing. It wasn't the words, exactly. It was how he said them. Like something was unraveling, and he didn't want anyone to notice, but couldn't help letting it slip. I walked over and sat on the edge of the counter, letting my legs swing a little. "You good?" I asked, keeping it casual. Evan didn't answer right away. He pushed a hand through his hair and glanced at the rain streaking down the front window. "Not really," he said finally, "but whatever." That silence hung between us for a beat too long. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You need a ride?" I frowned. "What?" "It's raining," he said, like it explained everything. "You walk, right? I can drop you." I should have said no. I almost did. But something about the way he offered, soft, unsure, made me nod. "Yeah, sure. That'd be nice." The ride to my place wasn't long, maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like a stretch of time that didn't follow the normal rules. He had the heat on low, some moody indie song playing under the hum of the engine. Neither of us talked much, but it wasn't awkward. When we pulled up to my apartment building, I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly. "Thanks for the ride," I said, already reaching for the door handle. But then he said, "Wait." I turned back. Evan looked nervous. Not twitchy, just careful. Like he was walking a tightrope with no idea how far the fall was. "Would it be weird," he said, "if I asked to hang out sometime? Like, not at work?" My brain kind of glitched for a second. Evan never asked anything. He didn't even ask where the paper towels were when we were out. So for him to say that? "No," I said, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. "That wouldn't be weird." He nodded once, a real smile flickering on his face. Not a sarcastic smirk. A real, genuine one that made me feel like maybe this wasn't just a normal Monday after all. "I'll text you," he said. "Okay." And I stepped out into the rain, feeling like something big had just started. The thing about Evan was, he wasn't the kind of guy who made empty promises. If he said he'd text, he meant it. Still, I didn't expect it to happen so soon. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed during one of my boring econ lectures. "Evan, you busy tonight?" I stared at the screen for longer than I should have, ignoring the professor droning on about supply curves. My thumbs hovered as I tried to come up with a casual reply that didn't scream, "I've been waiting for this." Me. Not really. Why? Evan. Come over. I'll cook. Me. You cook? Evan. Better than you, probably. 7? Okay. I smirked, shaking my head. He was bold in text in a way he wasn't in person. That alone was enough to make my chest tighten a little. I told him yes, and that was that. By the time I got to his apartment that night, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and glowing under the lamplight. Evan's place was only a 10-minute walk from mine, but I still felt weirdly nervous on the way over. When he opened the door, the smell hit me first. Garlic, butter, something sizzling on the stove. "You weren't kidding," I said, stepping inside. "Told you," he replied simply, going back to the pan like it was no big deal. He was wearing a plain t-shirt and joggers, barefoot, hair a little damp, like he'd just showered. He looked so normal, but in a way that made my throat dry. He handed me a beer and motioned toward the couch. "Sit, it'll be ready in 5. I did, glancing around his place. It was cleaner than I expected, a little sparse. Books stacked neatly, a couple sketches pinned to the wall, but nothing flashy. It felt very him. Dinner was pasta, simple, but good. We ate at his small kitchen table, and for once, the conversation didn't feel like filler. "You always been into cooking?" I asked. "My mom taught me when I was a kid. She worked late, so if I wanted to eat something decent, I had to figure it out. Guess it stuck." There was no self-pity in the way he said it. Just matter of fact. I found myself wanting to know more, to dig deeper into the parts of him he didn't usually show. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, Netflix playing some random show neither of us were paying attention to. Evan stretched out, one arm draped along the backrest, not quite touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his side. "Thanks for coming," he said suddenly. I turned my head. "You say that like I wouldn't," he shrugged. "People don't usually stick around, not with me." That hit harder than I expected. "Well," I said softly, "I'm not people." For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes flicked down to my mouth before darting away just as quickly. My pulse spiked. Was that? Before I could overthink it, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He grabbed it, glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. The small ease he'd been carrying slipped away. "You okay?" I asked. He locked the phone without answering. "Yeah, it's nothing." But the way his jaw tightened told me it wasn't nothing at all. I wanted to push, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back against the couch, letting the silence settle again. The distance between us felt heavy now, like there was something just out of reach, something waiting to break open. And I had no idea if I was ready for it. Evan wasn't much of a talker. That was something I'd already figured out after months of working shifts with him. But that night, sitting on his couch, the silence between us felt different. It wasn't the usual quiet comfort. It was loaded, tense, like he was wrestling with something, and I was just there, waiting. He finally broke it. "You ever feel like," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair, "like you don't fit into the version of yourself people think you are?" That one hit me straight in the chest. "Yeah," I admitted, trying to keep my voice even. "All the time." He glanced at me, really looked at me, and I swear the air in the room shifted. His phone buzzed again on the table, but this time, he ignored it. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head hanging low. "I don't know why I even asked you to come tonight," I frowned. Because you didn't want to eat alone?" He gave me a small, humorless smile. "That and I guess I wanted to see if I could stop pretending for a while." I tilted my head. "Pretending what?" He didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on some spot on the carpet. When he finally spoke, His voice was low. That, I don't want more. The words hung in the air, heavy, confusing, but electric. My heart kicked up faster than it should have. More. What? I asked carefully. That's when he looked up. His gaze was steady, almost daring me to figure it out for myself. And maybe I did. Because suddenly I was hyper-aware of how close we were sitting, of how the heat from his arm brushed mine every time either of us shifted even slightly. I swallowed. Evan. He shook his head quickly. Forget it. That was stupid. But it wasn't stupid. It was the most honest thing he'd said all night, and I couldn't just let it slide. It's not stupid, I said. It's just unexpected. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Like he was caught between retreating back into his shell or stepping forward into something new. He chose somewhere in between. I don't want to mess things up, he said quietly. You're not, I told him, though my pulse was still hammering. You just caught me off guard. The corner of his mouth twitched, like he wanted to smile but couldn't quite bring himself to. Then he leaned back against the couch, running both hands over his face. God, this is why I don't do this. I sound like an idiot. You don't, I said, maybe a little too quickly. The truth was, I didn't think he sounded like an idiot at all. If anything, he sounded like someone who was finally letting me see a part of him no one else got to. And the more he let slip, the more I wanted to know. We sat in silence for a while after that. The TV flickered with some sitcom laugh track neither of us was paying attention to. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the quiet. And then, Evan shifted just slightly, his arm brushing mine again. This time he didn't pull away. I didn't either. I should have moved. That's what any rational person would have done when things started to feel this charged. But I didn't. Evan's arm stayed against mine, solid and warm, not accidental anymore. Neither of us said anything for a while, just sat there in that charged silence while the TV babbled on in the background. Finally, I cleared my throat. So, what happens if you stop pretending? He turned his head toward me, eyes narrowing like he was trying to figure out if I was messing with him. What do you mean? I mean, I said slowly, if you're tired of pretending you don't want more, what happens if you just, I don't know, go for it? For a second, his expression faltered, like he hadn't expected me to actually push him. His jaw flexed, his hand drummed once against his knee, and then he leaned back with a soft exhale. You make it sound easy, I shrugged. Sometimes it is. He studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that made me feel like he was trying to read my thoughts instead of my face. And then, almost too quietly, he said, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to decide if you want to. That was it. That was the moment everything tilted. Evan shifted closer, just an inch at first, like he was testing if I'd flinch. When I didn't, he leaned in further, the gap between us shrinking until I could feel his breath against my cheek. My pulse was in my throat, loud, almost choking me, but I didn't move away. I couldn't. And then his phone buzzed again. The sound broke the spell instantly. Evan froze, pulled back, and grabbed the device off the table. He didn't unlock it, just stared at the screen long enough for me to notice his whole demeanor change. Tense, guarded, like a wall had slammed down between us again. Sorry, he muttered, standing abruptly. I should take this. I blinked up at him, heart still racing, but nodded. Yeah, sure. He stepped into the kitchen, voice low, as he answered whoever was on the other end. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone was enough, clipped, strained, completely different from the Evan who'd just been leaning close to me. I sat there, staring at the muted TV, trying to process what the hell had just almost happened. A few minutes later, he came back, phone shoved into his pocket, expression carefully blank. Sorry about that, he said. No worries, I replied, though my chest was tight. We sat there for another beat, the tension thicker now than before. And then he cleared his throat. I should probably call it a night. There it was, The shutdown. I stood slowly, grabbing my jacket. Yeah, thanks for dinner. He gave me a short nod, eyes not quite meeting mine. Anytime, but when I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The thing about almost moments is, they don't just disappear. They linger. They replay in your head over and over until you start second-guessing everything. That night, lying in bed, I kept running through it. The way Evan's arm pressed against mine. The way his voice dipped when he admitted he wanted more. The way he leaned in, just close enough for me to feel it, before that damn phone interrupted. By morning, I was convinced I'd imagined half of it. That I'd read too much into a moment that meant nothing to him. But when I got to work that afternoon, Evan looked at me differently. Not cold, not distant, but wary, like we were carrying something invisible between us and he didn't know how to handle the weight of it. "Hey," I said when I walked in. "Hey," he replied, voice neutral. And that was it. No mention of the night before, no acknowledgement of what almost happened. We just went about our shift like nothing had changed. Except everything had. By closing time, the tension was unbearable. I was stacking books when he finally spoke up. "You free tomorrow?" I glanced at him, surprised. Yeah. Why?" He hesitated, chewing at his lip. "I was thinking maybe we could go somewhere. Not my place. Not work. Just somewhere." My chest tightened, but I forced a casual shrug. "Yeah, sure. Where'd you have in mind?" He gave a small shake of his head. "I'll figure it out." The next evening, Evan picked me up in his beat-up Honda. He didn't say where we were going, just drove us out of the city until the streetlights gave way to open road. The radio played low, some mellow indie band, and for once, the silence didn't feel tense. It felt intentional. About 40 minutes later, we pulled into a nearly empty parking lot at the edge of a trailhead. Trees loomed around us, their branches tangled against the dusky sky. "A hike?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Evan smirked faintly. "Not really. There's a spot up here I like. Thought you might too." We walked in silence for a while, our sneakers crunching against the gravel path. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, the kind of crispness you only get outside the city. After a short climb, the trail opened up to a small overlook. From there you could see the whole valley below, scattered lights flickering as the town settled in for the night. "Wow," I muttered. "Not bad." "Told you," Evan said quietly, shoving his hands in his pockets. We stood side by side, staring out at the view. The quiet wasn't awkward this time. It was calm, steady, like the world had finally slowed down enough to let us breathe. After a while, I glanced at him. His face was half lit by the fading light, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. And I realized something. This wasn't just about scenery. This was about trust. About him letting me into a part of his life he didn't share with anyone else. I swallowed. "So this is where you come when you're tired of pretending?" He gave a short laugh. "Something like that." Then he looked at me, really looked. And in that moment, I knew the almost from last night wasn't just in my head. It was real. And maybe, just maybe, this time he wouldn't pull away. The overlook was quiet except for the wind pushing through the trees. My chest felt tight, like every second was stretched out longer than it should be. Evan was still looking at me, steady, unreadable, and I had no idea what to do with the weight of it. "Why'd you bring me here?" I asked finally. He shifted, his hands still buried in his pockets. "Because I wanted to, and because I knew you wouldn't tell me it was stupid." I let out a breathy laugh. "You don't really do casual hangouts, do you?" "Not with most people," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "With you, it feels different." That landed harder than I expected. My throat went dry, my brain scrambling for something clever, something safe. Instead, what came out was quiet, almost hesitant. Different how? He didn't answer right away. He just stepped closer, just a few inches, but enough for me to notice. Enough for me to feel the warmth radiating off him in the cool evening air. "You don't make me feel like I have to play a part," he said finally. "You just let me be." And then he stopped talking. He just stood there, staring at me, waiting. I could have left it at that, could have nodded, made a joke, let the moment pass like we had the night before. But something in his voice, the rawness of it, made me brave enough to push. I stepped in, too, closing the last bit of space between us. My shoulder brushed his arm. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said quietly. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Evan reached up, his hand hesitating in the air before resting gently against the side of my jaw. My breath caught. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned in just enough to erase the space between us. The kiss was tentative at first, cautious, almost shy, but the second our lips touched, all the tension that had been simmering for weeks snapped loose. Evan exhaled against my mouth, his other hand curling into the back of my jacket like he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. I pressed in closer, the kiss deepening, my pulse racing so fast I could barely think. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, Evan let out a shaky laugh. "Shit," he whispered. "I didn't think I'd actually—" "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "Me neither." He looked at me then, eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them, vulnerable but sure. "This isn't just a one-time thing," he said softly, almost like a promise. And I believed him. After that kiss, neither of us seemed to know what to do with our hands. Evan kept his on my jacket a second too long, like he didn't trust himself to let go, while I stood there trying to steady my breathing. The night air felt different now, charged, alive, like the whole world was waiting for what came next. He finally pulled back, though not far. "I don't do this," he said, voice low. "Do what?" I asked. "This," he gestured vaguely between us. "The letting people in thing." I smirked, though my heart was still hammering. "Guess I'm special then." That earned me the tiniest grin, quick and unguarded, before he looked away at the valley below us. "You are." The words were simple, but they stuck. We walked back down the trail in silence, but it wasn't the awkward kind. His hand brushed mine a couple of times, and each time neither of us pulled away as quickly as we should have. By the time we reached his car, it felt like the space between us was permanently smaller. The drive back was quiet too, but different from the rides we'd shared before. He didn't keep his eyes glued to the road the whole time. He glanced at me, more than once, like he was checking if I was still there. Like he couldn't quite believe this was real either. When he pulled up outside my apartment, I hesitated with my hand on the seatbelt. "So," I said. "So," he echoed, smirking faintly. I rolled my eyes, but my chest was warm. "You're not just gonna act like that didn't happen, right?" His smirk faded into something more serious. "No, I don't want to." The honesty in his voice hit me harder than the kiss itself. I leaned in, gave him another quick kiss before I could overthink it, and then pushed open the door. "Good. Text me." "I will," he said, his voice firm, certain. The next couple of days were weird. In the best way, but weird. At work, we kept it professional, but there was a new layer under every glance, every word. When no one was around, he'd brush past me a little too close, or his hand would linger when he handed me a book. By Friday, he texted, "My place. Tonight. No excuses." And that's how I ended up standing outside his apartment, palms sweating like an idiot, before knocking. When he opened the door, he looked calmer than I felt, but I could see it in his eyes. The same nervous energy, the same anticipation. "You came," he said. Wasn't gonna say no. I shot back. Inside, it felt different from the first time. The tension wasn't about if something would happen. It was about when. We sat on the couch again, side by side, some random playlist filling the silence. For a while, we just talked about nothing, about everything. Classes, music, dumb childhood stories. But the whole time, I was hyper aware of the fact that our knees were touching. Eventually, he set his beer down, turned toward me, and said, "I've been thinking about that night at the Overlook." Yeah? I asked, my throat dry. Yeah, he said. Then his hand slid onto my knee, firm, steady. And I don't want to stop it almost. Before I could respond, he leaned in again. This kiss wasn't tentative like before. It was certain, hungry, like he'd made up his mind. And this time, neither of us pulled away. The kiss deepened fast, his hand tightening on my knee like he was anchoring himself there. My pulse raced, and for once I didn't overthink it. I just leaned in, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, Evan rested his forehead against mine. "This feels insane," he muttered. "Good insane or bad insane?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. He let out a shaky laugh. "Good. Definitely good." Something loosened in my chest at that, like I'd been holding on to a fear I didn't even know I had. We didn't move to the bedroom that night. Not yet. Instead, we stayed on the couch, tangled together, talking between kisses. He told me about the pressure he'd always felt to be someone he wasn't. How his phone had been buzzing that night because of his ex, someone who still thought they had a hold on him. How he'd been afraid to let me in because once he did, it would mean something real. "I don't want this to be casual," he said, his voice low but steady. "Not with you." I swallowed, my chest tight but in the best way. "I don't either." And that was it. The line we'd both been dancing around finally erased. When I left his place the next morning, the world looked different. The air felt lighter, the rain-washed streets brighter. We hadn't defined anything, hadn't made any grand promises, but I knew it was real. Because for the first time since I'd met him, Evan wasn't pretending anymore, and neither was I.